So unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard already that there are a lot of fears around a potential US economic collapse, a recession, that kind of thing. On Twitter, you've got images of this nature, and then it's been reported that 2.9 trillion has been wiped from the stock market, and this is the worst day since 2020 COVID crash. You can even see here as well that there's a hashtag of buy the dip. If this is the case, this right here is probably the most important graph to look at, and I'll refer back to it in this video as well. And so you can see that the S&P 500 is pretty much near an all-time high. And if you look at the S&P 500 and it being at an all-time high, and then you look at it in the context of this graph right here, the big question is, how can we benefit from this potential upcoming recession? The way that I always invest, right, or the vast majority of the time, not always, but I always look at the scope for growth up, right? So what I mean by that is, when things are at an all-time high, there's very little data to indicate where it might go in the future. Whereas when things are at the bottom, that in of itself is a measure for me to show how much growth there is up, how much upside is there on this stock, right? And so whilst, on Twitter, for example, we've got a lot of hype, the classic thing with these images as well to almost indicate a bloodbath, red invokes fear, it invokes panic. I'm just sitting back. I'm just sitting back and observing this current situation, because this current situation presents a lot of opportunity right now, or not right now, but soon enough. Certainly the thing that I'm doing right now is I'm getting my money ready, and I'm just going to wait patiently by the sidelines. You can look at these hashtags on Twitter, buy the dip. I think it's a bit too premature for that personally, or from my perspective, I'm not going to go in at the moment. I think the big indicator for me is when mainstream media confirm that we're in a recession, that's when I think we're going to be at peak panic. That's when I think we're going to be in and around this stage of the market cycle. Markets operate in cycles. This is really important. Markets operate in cycles. And so basically my objective, right, is through indicators in the outside world, the news being one of them. When there's that confirmation that we're in a recession, I'm going to be looking at stocks. I'm going to be looking at the S&P 500 graph as an indicator. I'll look at the volatility index as well, VIX. It serves as an indication of when there's a lot of fear in the market. And so looking at the VIX index, looking at the S&P 500, looking at a few stocks in general as well, looking at mainstream media, those will almost be my confirmations. But certainly when you see this kind of press, the great cash out with the likes of Jeff Bezos and a few others who are now selling, combined 11 billion worth of company stock. You also have Warren Buffett selling half of his Apple stock. But certainly overall, with me, I'm not overly concerned. I've already spotted a few companies that look pretty interesting. Nike, for example, looks very interesting at the moment. It's at its lowest for some time. Nike shares tumbled quite a lot relatively recently. It was in response to growing competition from new arrivals such as On and Hoka. I don't know how you say that. Again, I wouldn't be overly concerned about that. If they were such a threat, Nike could acquire these companies very easily. Nike are a stalwart. They're probably the biggest trainer or sneaker brand in the world. And so when I look at the share price at the moment, it's at $74. And again, this is a good example of what I would look at in terms of what's the scope upwards from here. There's a lot of, the way I look at this, there's a potential for huge upside. And again, if you're into dividends as well, not bad. It's at 2% at the moment. Another one that I really like is Nubank. I've been watching them for some time. I did a separate video on Nubank actually, and I really like them. They have a really strong competitive advantage. A Latin American fintech bank. the only Latin American bank, I think there's one other, I can't remember what they're called off the top of the head, but fundamentally they're not a bricks and mortars business. And so because they're not a bricks and mortars business, they don't have bills to pay to maintain buildings, to maintain buildings. And so with that, they can offer their customers highly competitive rates. And they have a huge expansion plan. They're currently in Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil. They've got about 50% of the market in Brazil. They're not fully penetrated in Colombia or Mexico. There's still a lot of market, a lot of runway to go there in those countries. And I think in the future they may be trying to tap into Argentina. But like I said, I did a previous video where I go into a lot more detail about them and their strategy. I'll link it in the description below. It's worth having a look if you're interested in them. I really like them just because of their competitive advantage. They've dropped significantly over the past month. I'll be keeping an eye on them. They're one of the companies that I'm looking at that I would potentially like to get involved in. And so like I said, a lot of the companies that I invest in, I have a long-term vision with them because I like the companies, I understand the companies, they have a USP or they're doing some really interesting or cool stuff, which I feel has the potential in the future to be a very compelling, unique service proposition or a moat in some cases. And so I have a lot of faith. This upcoming period is going to be really, really interesting. I'm actually looking forward to it. As much as my portfolio's value may go down, there's a lot of opportunity in the market, and I will be tracking or documenting different companies that I'm looking at and talking a little bit more about them and doing a bit of a cross-examination or an analysis on their business strategy, if they have any USPs and moats, leadership, and the typical stuff that I cover in all the other videos as well. But look, thanks very much for watching. Have a great day and see you in the next one. All the best.